The Ezio trilogy has its own collection containing all 3 games and 2 other things in 1. Most importantly, we got remasters of Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations. The graphics of all 3 are improved and all the DLC minus the multiplayer is present. Other than that, not too much has changed. Assassin's Creed 2 is still a tremendous step up from the previous game in just about every way. Animation seems sharper, combat feels better, and there are just more options and weapons than ever. And I get to fight with the Hidden Blade. I, just before playing this collection, replayed Assassin's Creed 1 on PS3, so my thoughts on 2 are very much arranged through that lens. While many things have improved, we still don't have that sweet crossbow yet, but we got a gun, and 2 hidden blades to make up for it. I kinda wish they'd continue with that trend and somehow worked a 3rd hidden blade into Assassin's Creed 3. Yuck! Let's forget I wrote that, and said it out loud, and left it in here on purpose just in case Ubisoft is listening.
It is likely that I can give you what you seek, but we will talk later.
I might be in the minority, but I loved AC1's ending. The Matrix Reloaded-like use of powers from a virtual world in real life thing is dope, and I always thought Eagle Vision was a cool, if vague and confusing, way to work in a superpower. I mean, what exactly does it do? I have played almost every single Assassin's Creed game and I don't really know what it is. It seems like the range of things it can do varies so much from game to game, and now it's just an actual eagle. If you didn't know that was the case, I'm not joking. You literally instead have an eagle's vision. I was, as a teenager, beyond excited for the sequel, and for once a game that comes chronologically after another game I like was not a disappointment at all. If anything, it's an example of one of the best sequels ever. So much of the series is glorious and always has been. The way so much of the video gaminess is explained canonically, the HUD, your database, even your health meter are all explained, in my opinion, fairly well in-game. My favorite example is loss of health being referred to as desynchronization, implying that because you've been hit, you've just done something that the assassin would not have done. Thus, you aren't really dying. You're straying further and further from the path of events as they did, or as they could have, occurred. This doesn't just apply to health, but all actions not in line with the assassin in question's own. Let's remember that extremely important little factoid as we learn more about our life-taking protagonist. In 2, we start off as a naive teenager. You see Ezio grow up, or at least go from a young delinquent with 0 murder ability to a trained, weirdly zen assassin, through very little choice of his own. He has far more dialogue than his predecessor, and most importantly, his personality was charismatic, and at the time unique in a landscape of quiet, mysterious edgelords. The player character has some visual options now. In addition to new armor pieces that offer a small amount of change and visual progression on your character, you can now dye clothing to look even snazzier. Neato. I enjoyed the modern day bits, as I always do, and I distinctly remember loving the mystery of what happened to Subject 16, and the connotations throughout that the same fate could await you, Subject 17. Also a good touch was to let us fight as Desmond in the present day. Aw, he thinks he has a sword. Look at that. How is he doing that? The setting is also a noticeable contrast. Coming from the first game's bleak desert cities to a place like Venice is refreshing, and all the environments are built really well in terms of how they serve gameplay. Fighting using verticality to your advantage, escaping after a big fight, and just general getting around seems much easier than before. Don't get me wrong, I do have a lot of love for the first Assassin's Creed, and without a video of that I guess it sounds a little bit like I'm bashing it, but I'm just trying to illustrate how much of a true sequel and a genuine step up in every way AC2 is. I'm not sure if all that could be said for Brotherhood. While also a great game, perhaps even a slightly better game than 2, it's hard to remove myself from nostalgia and say for certain. Oh wow. They hit us a lot worse than I thought. There are some definite improvements, great new music, even though AC2 is known for having a great soundtrack as well, and finally, horses can now roam city streets, plowing over pedestrians the way God intended. But most importantly of all, I got that crossbow, and it's phenomenal. It's like a quiet version of your gun that holds way more ammo and sort of renders the gun obsolete. Brotherhood also offers a little bit more variety in that you can color Ezio's cape independently, and I can now be navy blue. Look how comfortable he is. I did that. It's not the same kind of leap as 1 to 2, but now that I'm compiling improvements to talk about them as a list, there are quite a few. The day-night cycle is beautiful, for example, and adds a lot to the atmosphere, as do the remastered graphics in the collection as a whole. Combat has changed slightly, but Ezio still hasn't lost it with age. On top of dramatic execution chains, enemies just have less health and seem far less competent than before. It's entirely possible to decide not to run away from anyone and just hold your ground forever against a horde. Kinda takes away from the assassin aspect, but I like Ezio as he gets older being even more badass, and capable of doing all those dark deeds he was put here to do. The option to use recruit assassins was an awesome feature that I'm surprised wasn't kept for later games. I loved being able to summon these recruits to force down the same horrific path of homicide I took, and they're so useful. Look at that. Look at him go. Alright guys, stop now. Oh god, what have I done? The kick or small stun attack being added in was a great decision too. Just to help break up the monotony of waiting for your opponent to attack so you could counter. You sort of have to open yourself up to use it, breaking their block but also stepping out of your own. Really takes skill, this one. Not for the casual gamer is the kick button. Yeah, get it. Brotherhood sure isn't perfect though. Map clutter is completely insane. Large portions of the open world are also cut off by glowing walls until you complete unspecified story missions at some point in the future. This includes viewpoints you've been trained to this point to travel to and climb with Pavlovian intensity. Brotherhood is also home to the single worst mission in all of Assassin's Creed history. That one where you infiltrate the big castle and rescue your current chica and wind up having to drag Lucrezia Borgia around. And she's awful. And it's awful. And all the hallways look the same. And it just depresses me to think about it. Overall, I thought Brotherhood was great, flawed, and perhaps too filled with content for the map's own good. Is it my favorite story of the three? No, but it had some great moments, and while I don't consider it as important as the bookends 2 and Revelations are, I wouldn't say that it's skippable either. Also, is that a goddamn cardboard box? Revelation sums up the series well and feels like an appropriate end for Ezio. I'm glad he didn't have to suffer through the changing controls and lack of control that came with the next games in the series. We pick up with our boy exactly where we had hoped he would be after the events of last game's Rome. It's nice to finally see a character you care about grow old and settle down with the one true love of his life. Death! Obviously, the game necessitates that so long as there is a story left to be told, the main character has an insatiable bloodlust. Remember, I desynchronize from the ancestor in question's memories if I do something they would not have done. Like when I kill civilians, you get a warning that Ezio would not do that. Eventually, that alone is enough to make me die. That same message will never come up, no matter how many guards I kill. Meaning he would have done that. And he did do that. And maybe I made him. The Hookblade is a welcome addition that deserves to come back in some capacity. That slightly extended reach has many a time been the difference between glorious continued climbing flow and shameful virtual doom.
Assassin!
How did you do that?
You can use it to perform new fancy maneuvers in combat like this cool new throw counter thing. It also allows you access to the many ziplines of Istanbul, which I adore and wish were a larger part of other games going forward. Not just Assassin's Creed, I mean all games. Think about it. We all love ziplines in games. Far Cry. Horizon Zero Dawn. This one. There are others. The Desmond story takes yet another dramatic turn for the weird, and the longer it goes on and the more we cut back to it, the more I become aware that these consecutive turns look a lot like a downward spiral. But we haven't quite jumped the shark yet. I still like the modern day story at this point. For the most part, Subject 16's story was always really interesting to me, but I don't actually feel like meeting him necessarily did Desmond's story any good. I wish his journey through what happened to Clay more closely mirrored Ezio's search for the truth behind Altair, rather than being in a cliche digital mind palace. I gotta admit though, these odd first-person puzzle things, while extremely derivative of Portal 2, are pretty well crafted. Time was definitely spent here by someone, and while I dreaded doing these in my first playthrough of Revelations, now, as an old man at the end of my life, I really enjoyed them. They're kind of fun, and most importantly they're different, and they're not that stupid RTS-like, resource-based mini-game thing that we were forced to play in the story, so that's a bonus. Also, look at this. I fell through the level in the Lost Archive DLC thing, and I was just stuck. Never actually made it out of here. Had to start again from the beginning of Chapter 3. Look how far I got. I was under there a while. Bummer. That being said, the information we do get is interesting, and there's a lot more to Revelations than just the modern-day B story. You have even more options now than ever, a large variety of new and surprisingly useful bombs you can actually aim, as well as craft and even test out should you find the appropriate workstation and items required. We have triangle map to shoot enemies automatically now, so long as we lock onto them, which is an amazing and most appreciated blessing. It makes life far easier in the long-range department. It's so overpowered they needed to make the crossbow a primary weapon. Oh, also, you can have a secondary weapon, a ranged tool for murder of your choosing that you will eventually realize is not as good as the throwing knives. I think I enjoy the combat most in this entry out of the three. You have a little more freedom and each button is finally useful as an attack or as a counter. Ezio is and always was a curious person, and perhaps more than anything else a seeker of knowledge, always looking to learn where he can, so it makes sense that now in his later years he would have the most expansive repertoire of his life. He feels like a badass old master assassin, coral belt gentleman. As he should. Look how big that shoulder pad is. The man's a legend. I'm also a fan of the sections of the game that focus solely on traversal in an almost platformer-like manner. Like the Assassin Tombs of AC2, or Romulus Whatevers of Brotherhood, they sort of feel like holdovers from Prince of Persia, but who says that's a bad thing? These quieter, less homicidal, man versus environment obstacle courses were a great way to break up the monotony of working your way through the map. The climbing used to have a real sense of control. Your skill had a great deal of effect on how you performed movement-wise. We used to be able to catch ledges. It was never perfect, but I enjoyed the larger amount of options and control we used to have in these days. While I don't in very many ways dislike the latest two games in the series, those as of now being Origins and Odyssey, and while a lot of things have been improved as the series moved on, I could definitely understand the feeling that some aspects of what these games were peaked with Ezio. The story is not going to be adapted into a David Fincher movie anytime soon, but it's better than Brotherhood. I think my opinion of the Desmond section has been tainted by time and the knowledge of what's to come, but watching Ezio finally find love again, the search for the Masyaf keys, and seeing the history of Altair, our former protagonist, in this, the final adventure of Ezio's life, was pretty powerful. When you first walk around in the old assassin headquarters 200 years later with the snow falling outside, it feels haunted. You've been here so many times in AC1, but never like this, and never through Ezio's eyes.
But what is Altair trying to tell us, I wonder? What does he want the future to know, or to learn?
If only I possessed the humility to say to myself, I have seen enough for one life. I have done my part. Then again, there is no greater glory than fighting to find the truth.
I felt really bad for Altair. In the same way I always felt really bad for Ezio after 2. They both fought so hard for knowledge, for the truth, yet in the end they were just conduits for the player, for Desmond Miles. Their stories weren't just parallel to each other, they informed each other. I loved this ending. It was so much more grounded, down to earth, and connected to something we already care about than the grander, more what in God's name is happening style endings of the last 2 titles. Revelations is probably my favorite of the 3 games in this collection. Wait, what's this? Who the hell is this guy? Are you serious? Again? Really? The cutscene that follows is actually kinda cool, and I like it for this game. I just wish it was presented more like a secret movie, something akin to the video we got in 2 of Adam and Eve stealing the apple. Not yet another spirit and or hologram coming to us in person to tell us about the precursor race and their bizarre yet remarkably forgettable politics. All 3 games in the trilogy end this way. Maybe it's not as bad as I'm making it sound, but by comparison to the incredible, far more relevant tale of Ezio, the lifelong seeker of truth, learning from the regrets of his equally dedicated predecessor and being wise enough to not push any further, and to have him walk away from the pursuit of knowledge by literally not picking up the apple of Eden, is a very clever metaphor that was completely lost on me the first time around. It's so easy to forget how impactful the story of these classic games used to be. I miss being fascinated to see what happens next. This was all decent sci-fi once. Just look at the sup, I'm Minerva and I'm talking to Desmond by staring into the camera like I know you're playing a video game in your living room, Kyle, thing that happened all the way back at the end of 2. And 3 consecutive games of doing that later, you forget how original it was at the time. There were many more seeds in these earlier games that just seemed to point towards more good things in the future. At the time, I thought it seemed like we were building up to a trained Desmond using his skills in the modern day.
I still don't see how I fit into things.
We're going to train you. Turn you into one of us.
Would have loved to play that game. My poor 14-year-old imagination was left to speculate forever though, as I'm sure you know now, AC3, the next entry in the series, is the end of Desmond's story, and in a way, the killing of all that long-cultivated potential that the modern-day storyline had. I still love this series, and especially the games that started it all. I even still love the first one to an extent, just a lesser extent. The Ezio Collection is just much easier to hop into and enjoy now in 2020. All in all, do I have hope for the future of the series? No, I do not. But if Devil May Cry can come back and fan service me personally so aggressively, perhaps my beloved Assassin's Creed can too.
An old man, and still he fought to hold our brotherhood together. I would have called him stubborn in my youth, but now I can only admire his courage.
Ezio was definitely the most fleshed out assassin we ever got, having 3 whole games to get to know him, and I suspect he's most people's favorite AC protagonist to date, myself included, which is surprising considering what a prolific murderer of anyone who attempts to guard anything he is. I wish I could stop him somehow. I had fun playing through this collection now in 2020, and I definitely recommend giving them a chance if you haven't played any of the games contained within, or if you just want to hop back into the glory days in an accessible, potentially expanded, depending on when you last played, and all around much prettier way. I'm a real big sunsets and video games guy. And who knows, with the next game in the franchise reportedly coming later this year in 2020, which, by the way, I'm thinking it won't. Maybe these older adventures will have some renewed relevance to the story. Maybe we'll finally tie up all those loose ends. Or maybe they had no plans for the future back when these games were developed and just made it up as they went along, and all the things that we loved in the past are dead.
Amazing.
P.S. Please press the more positive of the judgment buttons, tell me what I need to improve on most, and know that I appreciate both of you who I'm hoping watch this entire thing tremendously. Sincerely, thanks.
Steady! Just give up, course.